Pens, pencils, papers, journals, phones and Bibles, check stub. That's good. All right. Let me just whisper another prayer. Father, we've talked and we've greeted each other and asked each other how we're doing. And we've had maybe some coffee to drink. If I'm asking myself, what does it mean that 55 weeks ago I stood in here and talked about faith, a message about faith? So I have to confront myself and ask, what has changed in the last year, 55 weeks ago, in my story? And I would ask that on behalf of everybody in here as well. Please don't let us come in here just to be comfortable in comfortable chairs and think that this one little moment, 90 minutes or so once a week, is enough to keep up a relationship with you. So instead, will you do something different this morning? I think years ago I heard the guy pray, would you disturb us? And I hate to say that because that seems like a foolish prayer, but on the other hand, may we not be the same people that we were 55 weeks ago. And we know that a lot's happened since then, but I pray that you would move inside each of us through your Spirit. Amen. Amen. What do you think of with, we put that picture up here? Can you see that? I'm sorry. Look right there. Can you see that? I made my own here. I made my own sign. I was going to put on the bottom, can you tell we ate pizza last night at our house? I was going to put on the bottom here, DraftKings. That was the first thing that came to my mind. Because have you ever seen somebody that put a sign up at a stoplight and it said something at the bottom that was actually kind of creative, like need money for alcohol? Have you ever, or you've heard of it? Because it kind of makes wins on like online when people start posting it. And they're like, oh, somebody was honest, because there's some cynical thoughts that we all have. I put on this side, please pay my salary. Because I just thought, what are the different signs that people put up? Go to the next one. Spend all my money on cardboard and a marker. All right, let me ask you this question. Yeah, well, what's on the sign is not the point, but I want to ask a survey. We're going to do a whiteboard this morning, and then we're going to do the sermon, the text, and then we're going to do another whiteboard, okay? 3 parts here, right? A lot going on, which means I'm not putting stuff up. Well, I am writing this stuff up here, but you're going to tell me what to write up here. When you, no wrong answer, when you have driven by a stoplight and seen a person with a cardboard sign, and you can picture it right now in your minds, you can picture the person, man, woman, young, old, all that kind of stuff. No wrong answer. What is your response? No. On what? Depends on how they look and act. Okay? What else do you do or think? Hope 2 of them. What? Roll the windows up and what? One word. J-O-B. I'm going to write this other one here. Because I think it's the same thing, right? I know someone's in here, look down at your phone, look out the other way, talk to your kids when the person's walking by. Fear, okay. And then the big question, why are you out here? Okay?
Especially when they put up, for somebody that came from an environment that I had, when they put up, I'm hungry. And I know there's at least 10 meals a day served somewhere in New Orleans. And most of them are bad. You're not hungry.
Right. So it depends on the message. Okay?
Try to acknowledge them in some way.
Do you? All right.
Yeah, so no, I used to get a bubble gum.
Yeah.
People were so cynical about it. Like, all right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. My kid, I'd give him, it was a good bubble.
And you said acknowledge. Really? Okay. Bubblegum? MRE. What would you say, Don?
Well, readily, you want to justify the fact that you shouldn't have to get everything, but if your spiritual side kicks in and you say that can be Christ in that person, right? That the angel, that's the angel of the law visiting, and you have an opportunity to do something.
Those are two different things. Those are two different things, though. Guilt
No,
and
that's the
opportunity.
same thing. Yeah, you guilted it to
action.
All that else.
Yeah. Think about their family. Like who's there? Yeah. Big question, right? Hello? Where's your loved one?
Exactly.
Okay. Sorry. But your background, you say, I've worked at New Orleans Mission. I know some of the stories. I know some of the motivations. Walt says, I know what the options were. I know what the network of resources is. Yeah. Malou? Okay. All right. Meaning it's not just their family who's not behind them, but it's what's the word? Like, it's the network or the system, right?
One of the problems I run into, I should, but I don't change my ways. I should change my ways because in order for me to say, the guy's just going to have to get dope or get drunk or he doesn't need this, then I have to judge him. And as I understand generosity, it's not my business. I'm supposed to do what I'm supposed to do, and that's to give to the poor.
Yep.
What the poor does, we got to the poor. Not that I actually follow that. I'm just saying that I think it should follow.
Forces you to ask the question, what is generosity? Okay. Huh?
Also, I think sometimes when I'm thinking about life and I say, Lord, I do have a tendency to wonder, what happened.
Oh, yeah.
That brought him to that, that place,
What are the circumstances that
they
they...
might be out there doing it all the time, but I think that first time they did.
Yeah.
Actually,
Good.
walking across that line,
Good question.
But think about that, especially when I'm looking at all the young people, that are out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Deb said you're more prone to ask an older person, but you're saying when you see that person in their young 20s, it's like,
I get there.
Yeah.
Well, like, she said, where's the family at?
Yeah. What?
Where's your family? How do you get it where you're out here because normally you're going to go around and get dreams, of being something, of work.
Okay.
And here ends up when I go on the street asking,
Uh-huh. Let me ask the back row here, minus the ladies. What back row? New drivers. Now that you guys are in your wheels by yourself, what do you think? Huh? Look away. Yep. A little extra. Uh-huh. Throw them a few. All right. He's at least having fun about it. Okay. Trey? Oh. Had to? Had to help? Yeah. That's tough to see that because you said a bubble gum, and I thought that was interesting because I think we have, I don't know, Sean, like almost made it a habit of having a bottle of water in our car because New Orleans heat, you think to yourself, it doesn't matter how many places offer food. At some point, everybody wants a bottle of water in this world. But then food is one thing. Bubble gum is interesting. Almost like the main things that we go to would be food and water. But like that's a human. Anybody can go for a little refreshing little moment of bubble gum in your mouth, I think we were leaving Sam's Club or Costco once and with a hot pizza, not a frozen, like boxed, ready to go. And we opened the window, opened the pizza box, and let them reach in and grab a piece. And I thought, why didn't they just take the whole thing? Or I don't know, that probably was foolish, I don't know. But anyway, we've all done something that we probably liked that we did. We probably have all done something in here that we wish we wouldn't have done. And we probably all have questioned our actions over and over and said, was that the right thing in the moment for that particular person?
There's some generational changes too. The world's different today.
Yes, sure.
I grew up in a world where you hitchhike across the country.
Yeah.
Where, even if you weren't hitchhiking, you're walking down the road, somebody stopped and asked you to ride. It's just a different world, especially for ladies. And I don't believe that. I don't believe can't handle yourself in a bigger attitude. But I don't want my daughter dealing with people and stuff on the street. I just never know.
Sure. Absolutely. All right, so the wheels are turning, right? You guys have all started asking a little introspection. So I wanted to look in Scripture at the book of John. Matt and I have been talking about worldview for a few weeks. You guys know that that's the introduction to this. The passage in here doesn't come out and just flat out say, it doesn't say the world, it doesn't say worldview, it doesn't say paradigm. John chapter 13. And this whiteboard right here, I wasn't trying to tell you what you should do with your resources. And obviously, a stoplight moment is not the only moment when you encounter somebody in need. There are family members, there are people in this room, there are neighbors, there are people at work. Everybody has moments of crisis where they may have given up or they may have been, like Rustin said, asking for the very first time. And they may not even ask. You might be that one that needs to ask them. But anyway, I didn't ask that to say this is the only moment of a crisis inside of you, of a faith moment where you're asking yourself, am I supposed to act or not? But I wanted to start to open the dialogue, I guess, inside of yourself as to what your actions sometimes are. So John chapter 13, if you look as the disciples' feet, that's the beginning of it. But I wanted to go to the end of the chapter, the last couple verses. Let's see. Chapter 13, verse 36. Somebody read 36, please.
Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered him, where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow after.
All right, 1336. This was a common question that a student, Simon Peter, could ask his rabbi. That was the first thing I thought about when I read this. Because it's an interesting response. Where are you going? A rabbi, let me slow down here. Okay. Peter asked his rabbi, where are you going? There's kind of a story that Matt has told us over and over, and it kind of makes us all snicker. And it's the idea that a rabbi could take his students everywhere, including into the bathroom. There you go. You guys remember the story. Okay, so if you haven't heard that before, it's the idea that a mentor, a student, a disciple of their rabbi wants to know everything, literally everything that their mentor, that their rabbi does. Meaning, how do you do this? How do you do that? I want to see how you treat people. I want to see how you use the bathroom. In fact, that's a place that you can bless God. Thank you for everything working well. That's one of the prayers that you can say. Well, To ask the question, where are you going, was not that uncommon for a student to ask. But also, I reminded myself, and I want to remind you guys, who's Simon Peter? What's the well-known story about Simon Peter, besides this one? Walking on the water, right. The denial, this chapter, and then walking on the water. Think about who we're looking at here. There's biographies, snippets that are given in the Gospels of different guys. You know, you think of like Matthew, tax collector, and Zacchaeus moment of like, I'm going to climb. Okay, so like we have these little stories. We don't have huge biographies of people, but think of the characteristics that you think of when you think of Simon Peter walking on the water. When he says, Jesus, if it's really you, I could do this. And I think, you're crazy. Who would get out of the water or who would get out of a boat and step on solid nothing? No, I mean, it's like insane. Remember the only one that we know of that gets out of the water, right? And then a lot of times we criticize in that story because what happens? He begins to sink, right? He doubts, takes his eyes off of him, thinks about the waves, thinks about the depth of the water, that kind of thing. And we're quick to criticize. I didn't put it up here because I know the volume thing with movies. Remember the movie, The Indiana Jones? When they're going through the cave, or he's going through the cave, and he gets to this huge canyon, and he's about to go get the chalice, the cup. And remember the I don't know, gorge or whatever he's looking at, and he can't walk through. So what's he do? You remember? He closes his eyes, and he goes like this, and he steps onto nothingness, but there's a solid bridge. And so the people behind him don't believe, so he takes the gravel, the sand, and he throws it across so that they can see where they're going, because they don't have as much faith in that moment, I guess, as Indy did. Simon Peter had to be half nuts to step out of a boat onto water. That's who we're talking about here, okay? He's somebody that, in my estimation, it seems like he comes across in Scripture as somebody who he's fearless, but he's also candid about himself, about his story, and about his faith. Like I said, we kind of criticize him in that story, and we also criticize him a little bit here. And obviously, if you know the idea of the denial, you know what I mean. When I got into this verse, I looked up the word afterwards, because Jesus told him, you can't follow me now, but you can follow me afterwards. And I want to know what that was pointing at. And I really honestly didn't get a fair answer at that. Because if you think, what could Jesus have been talking about there? When he says, you can't follow me right now, what do we assume he's referring to? We assume Jesus knows he's going to be killed. We don't know how much he's explained to the guys. You know how we kind of look and he gives little clues and he gives little hints like, I'm getting ready to do this. You won't have me for a little while, those kind of statements. And he doesn't paint a clear picture. But yeah, after the resurrection, he comes back for a certain amount of time, right? Before he leaves, before he ascends. Is that what he's talking about? You can't follow me right now, but you will then. You'll see me again. We can still travel, teach, learn then. I don't know. And then you will follow me afterwards. We don't know if that's actually pointing even further ahead to like eternal life for Peter. We don't know how far in advance Jesus is pointing to. Let's go ahead to verse 37. Somebody read that. Dude's kind of extreme. He says, wait a minute, what do you mean? Why can I not follow you right now? I will lay down my life for you. Big statement, big promise, big offer, like of commitment. I'm all yours. I'm all in. But what's his response? Somebody read 38. There we go. So the other Gospels have the same story, but sometimes they say it a little bit different. Like the rooster, when it's going to happen, that night it's going to happen. They read a little bit differently. But will you lay down your life for me, really, Peter? Because truly I say to you, the cock will not crow until you have denied me 3 times. It's an interesting metaphor, right? It's an interesting nature statement. Because this is something that happens. Does anybody have roosters, chickens in your neighborhoods? Do you have one? Uh-huh.
We passed that house, a certain house, the rooster crowed. In the backyard.
This is not a daybreak at 6 a.m., is it? 5:30?
No, it's like 7:15.
Okay, and it's still crowing at you. All right, funny. You guys had them, right, at Camp Hope for a while? And there's a few other ones in that neighborhood, if I'm not mistaken, right, in Araby?
Yeah.
And is it pretty, like, daily? Like, pretty reliable, right? Between, like, the end of, not dusk, but the end of twilight starts to open up. So sometime between, I don't know, 5 and 7, somewhere in there, it's pretty automatic. And I think that's what struck me about this statement from Jesus, from Yeshua, when he responds to him so quickly with this idea that it's something that is guaranteed. Every day, the roosters crow. Every day, across the world. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the clock says. It doesn't matter what the weather is. It doesn't matter. It's a guaranteed thing that happens every day. And I guess that's the complete opposite we're seeing of what Peter's actions are. Jesus said something that is very dependable and very realistic, the rooster, and he's calling out Peter and saying, your actions, your commitment isn't really. And I'm not talking about 2 years from now. I'm like, Peter, like a couple hours from now. That's how weak and empty and undependable your statement is. That boggles my mind when I think about that, because I wrote in my Bible, I wrote, really, Peter? ? Because on one hand, I want to say it's appreciated or it's a great offer. Like we all want people to offer us help, to be there for us kind of thing. But what a stark slap in the face almost to say, wow, that's your actions, or that's your believability, I guess, in that moment. That kind of struck me. So last week, Matt kind of touched on the idea of worldview, and did you not look at your phone to let the lady in, man? Come on. Good job, Roman. Way to be a gentleman. Catch her up, okay? So, were you here last week? Okay, so worldview last week. Do you remember, or does anybody remember, the words in Scripture that we see for faith? Pistis. Thank you, sweetie. Pistis. Oh, you didn't like that, sorry. What is pistis? Where do you find that? Where do you find pistis? It's Greek, thank you. It's in the second half. Okay, what's the other word? Anybody besides Matt? Huh? Emunah. Thank you, Malou. Right, emunah. It's in that book. Do you remember what the example was for emunah? That's a quiz. Okay, so this is a great little book. I haven't read the whole thing yet. Matt got a hold of a few copies, and Walt was kind of bragging on it the other day, saying it was great what he had read, and that was like the first one. Smile. Okay. Well, I flipped through here, and this was a great picture of what the difference is between pistis faith and emunah faith. Okay. The difference is pistis, New Testament, is based on so much more often is based on knowledge and information. Okay. In fact, I saw it in 1 Corinthians. I read this statement, and not to take this out of context, but it says, for Jews demand a sign, which is action, it's visible, it's something you can see, or it's tangible, and Greeks seek wisdom or knowledge. And I remember looking that up because of this example in this book. So this book said, pistis is like the idea that you can, that you have a musical instrument, and that you learn to read music. But knowing and having an instrument, you could have a whole bunch of instruments in this room. You could have an orchestra worth of instruments in this room. But there's a huge difference between that and playing music or making noise. There's a big difference. So pistis is, I have the knowledge, I know how to read music, or I have the equipment. But emunah faith is like, I can actually make music, or I can play a melody, or we can be in harmony with each other. Two different things. Both are necessary, but they're still two different things. So I was at the library getting some books with Nora. She had a school project, and I looked up. I didn't have any books to return. I was kind of staying like, what do you do at the library? So I looked up on the search window, faith. This is what I typed in, okay? And this is the picture. All right, if you can see this This is the search results. The top one didn't really apply to this, but the top one there is Chuck Colson, okay? Great writer, great whatever. What Christians Believe is the subtitle of this book. Can you read this? Faith, what Christians believe, why they believe it, and why it matters. And I read that and I thought to myself, I have zero interest in reading that book. The second one is called Faith, a novel. And I thought, oh, something like get you into the story, I can take this on a road trip, like this would be interesting. And then the third one is called Have a Little Faith, a true story by Mitch Albom. You guys recognize that name, Mitch Albom, the author? Okay, so he wrote this book. I went and got it off the shelf. I told Don, went and got a book from the library about faith. I can't put this thing down, and I only got it 2 days ago, and I was actually kind of upset. I only made it through a couple of chapters this morning. I couldn't finish it. This is fascinating. This is the guy that wrote the 5 People You Meet in Heaven and Tuesdays with Maury, okay, about his professor dying and him sitting bedside with him. Okay, this was great. But I also just read this week this book called End of Watch. And this is about a Baton Rouge officer. He was a narcotics guy. And he'd been on the force, great guy, and they do a drug raid, and he gets shot and died instantly. And the story, the book, it's not so much of like the facts of this is what he did, and this is when he graduated from the academy, and he's got 3 siblings or stuff like that. It says some of that stuff, but it goes on to talk about his story. And this book is pretty much all about his faith. It's about his sense of humor and playing pranks on other people. He shredded newspaper and filled up someone's police car with newspaper. That's funny. And then he worked at a hardware store when he was a kid, so he knew they sold crickets at the hardware store, I guess as bait. So he bought a little bitty brown bag of crickets and he put it under a guy's seat. Like, the noise crickets make? Nobody knew until after his funeral that that was him. That's hysterical. It talked about the guy's actions and his sense of humor. It talked about how they have a little, the family had like a lake house cottage up in Baton Rouge, and he sat with a neighbor, just 2 chairs by the water, and they were friends. It was this lady, and she told years later how he just really wanted to make sure that he knew Jesus. That's the word it used. It wasn't his faith, or it wasn't God's protection as a law enforcement officer. It was, I want to know Jesus, and I want to make sure that you know Jesus. That was about as extreme or as forward as it got. Otherwise, it just told his story of how he lived his life. And the mom told about she was in the hospital. The chief comes over and says, I'm sorry, your son didn't make it. And the shock and the complete disarray you would be in as a person in your gut, torn apart. But there was like a light switch that went off because it wasn't necessarily her faith, it was his faith. And she just said, for some reason, I was okay. And the whole story, I couldn't put it down. The whole book just describes the guy's faith. I bring those up because I feel like both of those helped me see what this was talking about this week. That action, that faith belief is not the same as faith action. And while that is such a simple thing to say, it goes back to worldview that Matt talked about last week, just to introduce this idea of what does it mean for us to say who we are. And an example of that would be a church. If you think about, I don't know if you ever looked at church websites, but if you go to a homepage of a church, in the About section, it's always going to have a picture of the staff, and it's always going to say a What We Believe tab. And you can click on it. It's going to give all these fancy statements and verses about this theology stuff, what we believe. It's kind of like having musical instruments and the knowledge of reading music or the ability to read music. There's a far cry from what a church says on its website to what they do in action, right? And the way they live it out and the way, whatnot. You know as well as I do, or maybe I know better, sorry. Deputies and officers have a very hard time sometimes being involved in church. If you have a weekend job or if you have alternating weekends or you're on shift schedule, you know what I mean. But when someone lives it out on a daily basis and someone writes a whole book about their story, you can see the difference between just being a knowledgeable Christian with information versus what you actually do with it. All right. So what does this mean? Let's do a whiteboard. This is kind of the reason why I got you those pieces of paper, because I have a list here of categories in life. And we looked up a sermon series from Dr. Gary Johnson, a sermon series on worldview. And it is hard to sometimes get your mind and actually preach through what this series means. But this list I want to go through, I think I'm going to throw the ball back in your court of what it means to let this stuff affect your daily life. So this is what I mean. Your worldview, let me back up a second. When you guys talked about worldview last week, let me back way up. How about you tell me or tell the crowd, what is worldview? Someone give a definition of it.
Paradigm.
Your paradigm. Guess what my next question was going to be? What's paradigm? Thank you. So what is paradigm? How you perceive things, yes. And the lenses that you look through. Give me an example of that. Okay, good point. Someone in this room give me an example.
So I think about things about how it's going to affect my family or.
Good point. Your family structure affects how you view the world. If you are a single child, if you are an oldest child, if you're a baby, if you're the middle child, that's always interesting. Okay? Whatever birth order you are in, and if you're a male or a female, that affects how you see the world. Absolutely. And then, when you're a parent, it affects how you see the world. Right. You two are going to have your paradigm adjusted in a few minutes, a few days, a few weeks, a few months. It's going to change who you are. And I say a few weeks and whatnot because it's changed who you were, right? Just a few months ago, it changed who you were from newlyweds without a baby that you're expecting. So anyway, yes, good point. Just the fact that something you cannot control, the fact that you were born and what you were born into affects that. Give another one. Race, absolutely. I thought of that as an example. Miss Malou, not to pick on you, but you were not born in the United States, correct? That affects how you view things. And then you have a different heritage, culture, and race as the guy sitting next to you. That affects a lot of stuff. Absolutely affects the lenses that you see the world. Give another one. Religion. And define what you mean by that.
Which we're raised in.
Raised, exactly. This book, this was a trip. So this guy is 40 years old, okay, when he starts writing this book, or starts telling the story of the book. The story is, he grew up in the same church for 20 years with his parents, going every week, the whole deal. And then leaves the church, moves out of state, no relationship to those people, whatever. When he's in his 40s, they call him, the pastor calls him and says, "Can you do my eulogy?" I'm giving the whole book away. But pause right there, huh? Picture what that would be like. If you grew up here, like you guys are growing up here, you guys are growing up here. If you left here, Roman, you're the guy. Okay, so you're off to college. Let's just say hypothetically, in the next couple of years, sorry to tell you this, what if you moved out of state and you never came back here? But when you were 40 years old, he was 70, and he calls you and said, "Come do my eulogy." You know what a eulogy is? It means, right, you would shake your head and be like, "Nah, bro, that ain't me." All right? Okay. Is that how you talk to your dad? It is, right? Nah, bro. Okay, that's what I thought. So are you following me here? That's what this story is about. And okay, let me also back up a second. Let me tell you the truth. The truth is he grew up Jewish. The rabbi called him when he was 70 years old, and he had gotten very weak, and he called and said, "I know you're a great writer. Will you come do my eulogy?" So he wasn't just a pastor that he had went to services on the weekends. This young guy had followed him. He had followed him how to set up the high holidays in their temple. He had followed him into the early morning Shabbat classes. He followed him and saw the man walk on the Sabbath to Sabbath service, rain or shine, didn't matter because he refused to drive. This guy saw him do a lot of stuff. That's been fascinating to read that. So when you say religion, I wanted to explain that because it brings up a whole new thing. What you grow up watching and maybe being brought to, church camp, VBS, whatever you want to call those different things that some people grew up, Shabbat service, altar boy, is fascinating, the opportunities that we have when we're younger versus what we pursue when we're older. That definitely affects your worldview and your paradigm, how you see the world. Absolutely. Okay, now that we've kind of scratched the surface on what worldview and paradigm is, this is the stuff I want to write up here. I want you to know or to admit to yourself and on your piece of paper, your worldview is defined and it affects everything that I'm going to write up here on the board. Your theology. If you say, because I heard this in a class yesterday, a deputy was teaching a class and he was talking about the idea if you're ever in a bad situation like an officer-involved shooting. And he said, you have to be okay if you have to kill somebody. You have to make peace with your God, and I have to make peace with my God. And I've talked to the guy quite a bit. I know what he means is not this God that is described in this book. He's just describing it as my God, small G-O-D. It's higher power to him. We've had these conversations, whatever. So I explain that for a second because this word right here means different things to different people, including in this room. I'm not telling you something right now to teach you information. I'm asking you a question that you have to admit this realm of your life shows your worldview. The way that you view God, what you call him, for example, and when you're a daughter and you say the word father out loud, maybe in a prayer, means something different from based on the relationship that you have with your father, dad, stepdad, bro, whatever you call him. Matt's one of your pet peeves, right, for years was the hat that said, Jesus is my homeboy. Because of the reverence that some people have for God, and we think about a Catholic church and the incredible, the incredible sanctuary, the incredible chapel that you walk into in some places. It's incredible. The reverence that portrays does not come across on a semi-trucker's hat that says, Jesus is my homeboy. Capiche? That little example right there shows the realm of differences right here in our worldview. Biology. This is huge in culture right now. Your view of God and how you think he... Sorry, a little squiggly today. The way that you view God plays out in your view of biology. When you go outside right now, and when you got up this morning and the sun was coming up, Everly mentioned the sunrise comes in our front and it's pink and orange and incredible. Your view of a sunrise plays out your worldview. And when we have gotten this rhythm of taking a fall retreat every year, we've talked about how it's almost like resetting your batteries. Think about this. Nature, biology, nature. When you leave here, you will walk to your vehicle. You will drive home. You might walk on a sidewalk into your house. You might walk from your vehicle into a store. Maybe on a Saturday, maybe is the one day a week that you might step foot off of pavement onto grass. You ever thought about that? The retreat has become a reset your batteries for us because of the realm, the realistic idea that in order to experience God, in order to admit that he's part of your life, in order to sometimes just chill and decompress, reset, you have to experience God in a different way. That's my worldview right now, me stating that. That's just an opinion. I think of Allie doing the hammocks. Couldn't think of the word. Hammocks. Sometimes that's a weekly thing for you, right? Because that's a different way to experience God outdoors with a breeze and with a sun or shade or rain or whatever. That all comes out in that. Some people don't believe that God has anything to do with biology and nature. And we see a hurricane in Florida and people ask these questions. What the heck? Why? Your worldview comes out in this area. I mention these again, not to tell you what to think. Ethics, right and wrong. There's a reality that most of us live our life on a daily basis, doing whatever pleases us because we're number one. You could be one of the most selfless people in the world. Just be realistic. It really is still about us. We don't give up, unless you have a newborn, a lot of times you don't get up first thing and think of feeding other people and doing stuff for all kinds of other people. Usually it's, What do I want to do? Do I have to go to the bathroom, or do I want to eat something, or do I need to go somewhere? Usually our life is dictated by what's important for us. It's not necessarily dictated by what's right and wrong and how do I find the answers to that. It's usually, what do I feel? What do I want to do? Your worldview, your paradigm, and how do you view others plays out in this area right here. It's easy to say the golden rule: do unto others, the way you want to be treated. Right and wrong, an eye for an eye. It's easy to quote these things out of this book. It's a whole other thing to say on a daily basis: how do I want to be treated? What's right and wrong? How do I want to be treated? And there's not a right answer to that. I want to reiterate that. There's not a right answer to that as far as, I'm not telling you, what am I trying to say? There is right and wrong, and that's the whole basis of this word right here. But what I'm trying to say is I want you to be honest maybe and ask yourself, why do you think what you think is right or is wrong? For example, go ahead.
I know part of the this morning, but there was an article in the literature report. They talked about the word respect.
Okay.
And it said that respect means to re-speculate. Your initial response to looking at somebody, is, what does it do to me? Or how can I benefit from it? Or how does this really happen? He said, when you respect somebody or something, it's taking that second look and looking past what it could be from being
Sure, what your first thought was. And I kind of thought that over there. The first time you see somebody, when you're approaching the stoplight, isn't necessarily the same thing as what happens if you do open your window. Those are two different things, kind of like what you're saying. Your first glance versus what you actually do. Yeah. You read that, Richard Ward?
So it's more meditation.
I grew up in the military culture, and so I grew up hearing a lot about respect, honor,
Mhm.
the way we conduct ourselves, the way we, using manners and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And even though my parents weren't Christians or believed, I mean, they didn't practice believing in God as much, but there was an ethic. There was a standard of ethics there in our house where we knew what was right and what was wrong. Even though they could say, this is what the Bible says. We knew
Yeah.
the difference between paying for the side and religion. This instead.
That's a good point. Military culture, like we were just having this conversation with Corey, and you guys think all the conversations we've had with Rob and Mariah, people that have been in the Marine Corps, if you've been around people that are military, even for a short time, there's a whole different culture to it, right? There's probably a difference in growing up in an officer's home after years and years and years, as compared to I'm with some weekend warriors. Can I say that? There's a big difference, but there's still something about the uniform and then the flag and your commitment. What are you going to say?
Yeah, I think it's even simpler than all that. Like, do you use your turn signal?
Uh-oh.
It's like just the basics of, because I got in trouble when I used to do turn signal yesterday, so now I'm really sensitive.
Oh, in the car with another person? Okay.
Turn shopping cart, like, what do you do when nobody's watching?
Oh, shopping cart.
That's not the ethics of when no one else is watching. What matters.
And we like to define the word integrity with what you do when no one else is watching. When you're with my mom and you go to a store, Walmart, Winn-Dixie, whatever, Home Depot with my mom, she will, without a doubt, get out of the car and push a cart back into the store. Correct, granddaughters? Yes, every time. The other view, when you look at the other view of that action, is they literally hire people for this.
Right.
You could say that it's demeaning if you took someone else's job and did it for them. Like, that's a different way of looking at it, but what?
So I also think that relates to the other things that, they're all interconnected.
Right.
And like in the Native American culture, it's like how we are tied to the earth.
Yeah.
And how what our ethics do affects others, affects, it's all tied in. Whether or not I use too much plastic or whatever.
Mhm.
Anyway.
Yep. Down here, we were on our way here this morning, and for some reason we caught every stoplight on Judge Perez. And Sean even said, this feels different than the weekdays. Like these timers have to be something different on Saturday. And it brings up the question, when no one else is there, do you have to wait for the red light? Because literally, huh? Whoa. Y'all just threw out all the variables. At nighttime is different than daytime. Arguably, you can see better during the day if other cars are coming. You just said Ninth Ward. Why is it different a few blocks that way versus over here? We all know why it's different, because we're all scared at 9 o'clock at night or 1 o'clock in the morning when we're driving for whatever reason. Yes, but on the other hand, we do it all the time over at the St. Bernard Port. There's nobody there and they won't let you turn. So anyway, I'm rationalizing right now why it's okay, but someone else would say, it doesn't matter if nobody's there. You have to use your turn signal. You never know when someone's watching. Whatever phrase you want to use, we bend this. And if you've ever driven, like on the interstate, in some out west, there's nobody there. It's okay to go 95. There's nobody, even though the speed limit's there, We rationalize and we bend the rules. We rationalize all these areas. But it's interesting if you, Shauna called me out after becoming an officer. She called me out and was like, so you're not going to put your seatbelt on? You're not going to use your turn signal? Like, the list is long. All right, let's keep going because there's more here. History. How you view history. If you grew up in a military home, or if you, it just depends on the teacher or the book that you're reading, on how someone explains to you what happens. I feel like so often we use the example of Hitler with Jews. Even saying that does not give very good explanation to how that is really viewed, because there are different ways of viewing that. Some people say that Hitler was one of the most incredible and charismatic leaders you ever were around. We don't usually look at that through that type of paradigm, but what I'm trying to suggest here is there's different ways of looking at all these things. And when it's not very often that we say, think about the guy with the cross on his helmet, the Crusaders. There are thousands, if not millions of people that have been killed and died for different reasons in our history. And sometimes we don't look with different lenses or consider someone else's lens that they're trying to tell us or write in a book or whatever for history. Absolutely. That's why it's almost gotten harder, yeah.
All the social media platforms, all of that, even if it's fake news or real news,
Yep.
It gives us lenses. It affects our culture, it affects our theology too.
Yep. This one right here, psychology. Let me go back to what Tracy said on this question. Because this happens to us. When a deputy gets to a house and you start asking questions about what happened, why'd you do this, that's the perpetrator over there, all those kinds of things. If you just stop for 1 second and you ask the question, what is that person thinking? What lens are they seeing the world through? That's actually someone that's been diagnosed bipolar, like the whole deal. That happened to me the other night. And the lady was acting perfectly normal. I didn't know that 10 minutes prior to that, out of control. So if you don't take a second and ask questions and just pause for a second to consider what someone believes or where they're coming from, lens and paradigm, worldview. Yeah. Going back to where someone's been and what they've been through. Absolutely. That leads to this right here. How we get along with people, the distance between your chairs right now, that's the relationship with other people. And if you're comfortable with where you are, or when you're uncomfortable with others, that is a huge thing. And just because it's true for you doesn't necessarily mean it's true in all cultures, or things that maybe God has shown you, or that you just think, this is where I'm at. I'm not a hugger, I'm not a sit. This is how you view other people, and this is how you view the world. That's mind-blowing to me, because it is different across the board. And when we think, well, I've already learned that lesson, or I've already gone down that road, or I've already apologized for this, or I've already... Two more examples. Uh-oh. Oops. One quick example of this. I remember growing up, my grandfather up in Michigan worked in a warehouse, in a plant, whole career. I didn't know my great-grandfather died. My grandpa took his job, quit school, went and took his job, and retired from that place. He was a firm believer in Michigan, in the industrial place, the Democratic Party was the only way to go. That was his worldview. That's what he grew up and he worked the whole thing. How many people work in the same job their whole career these days? Very, very few. That was why he viewed that. It's different. I learned it when I talked to him and listened to him, growing up in Michigan. But then years later, finding out more about him as a person and just how you view stuff and what God has shown you, or the position and the situation you find yourself in, right? And then down here, again, what God has shown us in Scripture about maybe how to treat other people, what generosity looks like, etc. Is it situational? Is one person's resources and their black book and their wallet different than yours? And what has God put in your hands? What card has he dealt? What are you able to do? But again, just me saying, what has God given you? I looked at it over the last couple of weeks since we started talking about Worldview, and even since it was announced. I even paused and noticed other people throughout my day and admitted just to myself, they don't have the same worldview as I do. They don't categorize anything the same as I do. And so when I sit here and think, man, I'm kind of similar to all of you guys in this room. We're all here for one of the same reasons, and it's because somehow we want to worship God through looking at this book, joining together in music, caring about each other, having some coffee and banana bread and whatnot. And there's other people that aren't here because they don't necessarily maybe want this moment, or they haven't heard about this or whatever. But that being the case, the other people that we see on a daily basis that we interact with, we can either focus on the differences, or we can also come back to what brings us together in different ways. I don't know, the faith and the pistis and the immunarch got me this week in asking the question, what does it all mean? There's a Martin Luther King quote, faith is taking the first step even when you can't see the whole staircase. What? Yeah, no, that's Hebrews. Being certain of what you can see. But actually, let me go there. That's the often quoted statement from Hebrews. And I wrote this down, and I wasn't going to say it. But Don, is that in that Hebrews 11:1? But the best part sometimes about the often quoted stuff is when you read something right next to it. So, Hebrews 10, 38, 37, 38. You have a need for endurance so that you have done the will of God and you may receive what is promised. Because in a little while, the coming one will know and will not delay, but my righteous people shall live by faith. If you shrink back, my soul has no pleasure in you. We are not of those who shrink back. We are not destroyed. Those who have faith will preserve their souls. Going back to the righteous will live by faith. I think that's in 5 different places in Scripture. It's repeated. This would be obviously one towards the end. I scribbled down the different places. Romans, Habakkuk, Galatians, and then in Hebrew. It's written 4 different times. The righteous will live by faith. Righteous is a whole other sermon. Living by faith, though, is, I guess, what I'm trying to scratch the surface on here. I knew not coming up here, I did not have something to tell you 100% black and white. But I also knew that everywhere I looked this week, I found different ways that, different questions, different circumstances that was posing the question to me. What does it look like for you to learn pistis, but also to live out emunah, and it's constantly around me. I just wanted to put those categories up there because I feel like you will find, if you look for them, you will find opportunities even this week, even today, to ask yourself, how do I view things, and does God affect what I do in each of those areas? What?
Right? So the first one you don't be here. You have to be Jews all in, right? And you lose. 400 some years later, they were slaves.
Yeah.
And you think of 400 some years, I was sitting thinking how all of that, part of the history, philosophy, morality, everything had all changed. And then it comes to be delivered, and they go in the wilderness, and now they're trying, all that's trying to be changed again. God will reveal himself. I'm just thinking what a challenge that is, a change.
Yeah.
To go through. Maybe.
Yeah. All right. Kirsten's going to sing one more song. This is what I want to leave you with, though, is this idea that I just asked that because in society and culture, that is sort of a popular hot button thing. There's obviously so many hot button issues, and media makes a big deal about a lot of stuff. But my prayers for Worldview Paradigm series, that we will look at any area of our life and ask the question, are you living out what you're supposed to be living out? Are you doing what you've been prompted to do? And is it in line with who God is and who he is and who he's not, but how your faith through your prompting in the Spirit is in that moment. And what I mean by that is, I think sometimes we put so much guilt on ourselves over one little moment. And you're caught in like 30 seconds at a stoplight. Well, sometimes 2 minutes at a stoplight, because that was weird this morning. But anyway, you're caught at a stoplight and you're asked, what are you going to do in this one little moment? And we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. One time, Rob Thomas came up to me here and he said, I need your help. I said, okay, what's going on? And he said, every morning at work, I pass this lady at the AutoZone on Claiborne and Elysian Fields. And she was older. And it was bugging him because she was an older person by herself, very frail looking. And it didn't matter, hot or cold, and it was bugging him. He said, I want to go tomorrow. Okay, so Saturday morning we were going to drive up there, and he had gloves, and he had a plan. Like he wanted to take her to get something to eat, and he wanted to give her these gloves. So he's prompted, right, through these different areas of this is something I got to do. It's not just in the moment. I haven't forgotten about it, and we have to go back. She wasn't there. And so he felt guilt, and he wanted to do something about it. But the next time that she wasn't there, it evaporated. Now, the thing about Rob is, he's caught in moments of conviction. Otherwise, he has moments of generosity. Otherwise, it's not all lost in that moment. What I think the takeaway today is you're not lost in one of these categories. Your whole life, living out your faith, is encompassed in all of this and more. And I don't think that God, again, what I prayed in the beginning, God is not asking us for one little hour or one little sermon or one whatever. Or one to go make one pot of coffee or build one house. There are opportunities on a daily basis, almost on a minute-by-minute basis, for us to live out and show how he has affected our worldview and how we view the world through our paradigm.